The Korean Mafia boss invited his black secretary home for Christmas. What happened next will shock you. On a bitterly cold Christmas Eve in downtown Seoul, Jasmine Thompson, a devoted single mother working as an executive secretary, simply wanted to finish her last task and rush home to her waiting son. The glittering holiday decorations throughout the luxury office building only reminded her of how alone she felt in this foreign country, thousands of miles from her family in Atlanta. Then her boss, the notoriously cold CEO, Kang Min-jun, did something completely unexpected. He asked her to join him for Christmas dinner at his private residence. Before she could politely decline, he mentioned something about her son that made her blood run cold. She had no idea he knew anything about her personal life, and she certainly didn't know that accepting this invitation would pull back the curtain on a dangerous world she never imagined existed, one that would force her to make an impossible choice between survival and morality. But let's start from the beginning, because what led to this moment is a story you won't believe. Jasmine had moved to South Korea 18 months earlier, desperate for a fresh start after her marriage collapsed. Her ex-husband had drained their savings on gambling debts and disappeared, leaving her with their 8-year-old son Michael and a mountain of bills she couldn't pay. A recruitment agency had offered her a position as a bilingual secretary at Kang Enterprises, a massive conglomerate with interests in shipping, real estate, and technology. The salary was triple what she could earn in the States, and it came with housing and her son's school tuition included. She'd grabbed the opportunity without asking too many questions. Her first day at Kang Enterprises should have warned her that something wasn't quite right. The building was sleek and modern on the outside, all glass and steel, reaching 30 stories into the Seoul skyline. But inside, the atmosphere felt heavy, oppressive. Employees walked quickly through hallways with their eyes down. No one smiled, no one lingered for casual conversation by the coffee machine. Everyone seemed to carry an invisible weight on their shoulders. Jasmine's direct supervisor was a thin, nervous man named Park, who spent their entire orientation meeting speaking in rapid whispers, constantly glancing at the closed office door behind him as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. He explained her duties in fragments, his sentences trailing off mid-thought. She would manage Mr. Kang's schedule, screen his calls, prepare his correspondence, and, above all else, she would speak of her work to absolutely no one outside these walls. The way he emphasized that last instruction sent a chill down her spine, but she nodded and smiled, telling herself that Korean corporate culture was simply more formal and private than what she was accustomed to. She didn't meet Kang Min-jun himself until her third day. She'd been told he was traveling for business, which apparently meant hopping between Tokyo, Hong Kong, and Singapore for meetings that Park described only as negotiations. When he finally arrived, Jasmine was reviewing contracts in the outer office when the elevator doors opened and a group of men in expensive black suits emerged. Kang Min-jun stood in the center, and despite being surrounded by men who were clearly bodyguards, he was the one who commanded attention. He was tall for a Korean man, probably 6 feet, with sharp features that might have been handsome if not for the coldness in his eyes. Those eyes were dark, almost black, and when they swept across the office, people literally flinched. He was probably in his late 30s, dressed in a suit that Jasmine's limited fashion knowledge told her cost more than she used to make in 6 months. He stopped in front of her desk without greeting, looking down at her with an expression that gave away nothing. For a long moment, he simply stared, and Jasmine felt her heart pounding as she fought the urge to look away. She'd dealt with intimidating bosses before, but this was different. This man radiated danger. "You're the American," he said finally, his English perfect but accented. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir. Jasmine Thompson. I'm your new executive secretary. I know who you are. I approved your hiring. He glanced at the documents on your desk. You've reviewed the Singapore contracts? Yes, sir. I found 3 inconsistencies in the shipping schedules that don't match the customs declarations. I've flagged them for your review. Something flickered in his expression. Might have been surprise. You read Korean? I'm learning, sir. But these contracts had English translations attached. The numbers didn't match between versions. He held out his hand and she gave him the documents, watching as he scanned her notes. The bodyguards around him stood motionless, their faces blank. Park had appeared from somewhere beside her desk and was practically vibrating with nervous energy. Good, Kang said after a moment, handing the papers back. Fix them. I want accurate versions by end of business today. The thing is, sir, I'm not sure which version is correct. That's why I flagged them for you. His eyes locked onto hers again, and this time he saw something that might have been amusement. You're telling me you can't complete the task? I'm telling you I need clarification so I can complete it correctly. Park made a small, strangled sound beside her. The bodyguards remained statue still. Kang Min-jun studied her for what felt like an eternity. The English versions are correct. The Korean ones were deliberately altered. Fix them and find out who made the alterations. I want a name. He walked into his office without another word, the bodyguards following the door closed. Park grabbed Jasmine's arm the moment the door closed shut, pulling her aside with surprising strength for such a thin man. Are you insane? He hissed. You don't question him. You don't push back. You just do what he says. He asked me to review documents. I reviewed them. How am I supposed to fix problems if I don't ask questions? Park's face had gone pale. Listen to me very carefully. Mr. Kang is not like other executives. The rules are different here. If he tells you the sky is green, you agree. If he tells you to make something happen, you make it happen without asking how or why. Do you understand? Jasmine pulled her arm free. I understand you're scared of him, but I was hired to do a job, and I'm going to do it properly. She spent the rest of that day tracking down the source of the contract discrepancies, eventually discovering that a junior accountant had been skinning percentages by manipulating the Korean versions while leaving the English versions accurate, assuming no one would compare them. She compiled her findings into a report and left it on Kang's desk before going home, half expecting to be fired the next morning. Instead, when she arrived the following day, there was an envelope on her desk containing a bonus worth 3 months of her salary and a brief note in precise handwriting that read, "Competence is rare. Maintain it." The junior accountant was gone. When Jasmine asked what happened to him, the older man just shook his head and walked away. That set the pattern for her first few months at Kang Enterprises. She did her job with meticulous care, managing Kang's increasingly complex schedule, screening calls from people who never gave their full names, preparing documents for meetings that were never formally logged in any calendar. She noticed things, inconsistencies and oddities that didn't match what she understood of legitimate business operations, but she followed Park's advice and kept her observations to herself. Kang himself remained distant but demanding. He rarely spoke to her directly beyond issuing instructions, but she felt his attention on her work constantly. Every document she prepared was scrutinized. Every schedule she arranged was questioned. He was testing her, she realized, pushing to find her breaking point or her limit of competence. She refused him to give her either. Her son, Michael, was adjusting well to their new life, at least. The international school was excellent, and he'd made friends quickly, the way children do, unburdened by adult anxieties about cultural differences. He was learning Korean faster than she was, often correcting her pronunciation with the casual confidence of an 8-year-old who didn't yet know how much he didn't know. Their apartment was small but comfortable, located in a secure building in Gangnam that housed several other foreign professionals. On weekends, she took Michael to parks and museums, building a life that felt almost normal. But at work, normal was nowhere to be found. As the months passed and Jasmine's Korean improved, she began to understand fragments of conversations she wasn't meant to hear. Words like territory and shipment and protection, spoken in tones that made it clear these weren't standard business discussions. She noticed that certain visitors to Kong's office had visible tattoos extending from their collars and cuffs, traditional Korean designs that she'd learned were associated with organized crime. She observed that some of the business trips Kong took corresponded with news reports of gang violence or police raids in other cities. The truth crystallized one afternoon about 10 months into her employment. She was working late, as she often did, when she heard shouting from Kong's office. Her Korean still wasn't perfect, but she understood enough. Someone had stolen from him. Someone had betrayed his trust. Someone would pay for their disrespect. There was a gunshot. Jasmine froze at her desk, every muscle in her body locked. The office had gone completely silent. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Then, Kong's door opened and two of his bodyguards emerged, carrying something wrapped in plastic sheeting between them. They walked past her desk without even glancing her direction, heading for the service elevator that she'd been explicitly told never to use. Kong appeared in his doorway a moment later, his suit jacket removed, his white shirt pristine and unwrinkled. There was no blood, no sign of what had just happened. He looked at her with those cold, dark eyes and said calmly, "Cancel my afternoon appointments. I'll be working from home the rest of the day." "Yes, sir," she heard herself say, her voice somehow steady despite the terror flooding through her. He walked to the private elevator, the one that went directly to his penthouse. Just before the doors closed, he looked back at her one more time. "You're still here." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "I work until 6, sir. It's only 4:30. The doors closed. Jasmine sat at her desk for exactly 5 more seconds before she grabbed her purse and practically ran for the exit. She collected Michael from his after-school program early, claiming she didn't feel well, and spent the entire night lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to decide what to do. She could go to the police, but with what evidence? She had heard a sound that might have been a gunshot. She'd seen something wrapped in plastic. That wasn't proof of anything. And she'd heard enough about Korean organized crime to know that reporting a man like Kang Min-jun without solid evidence would be signing her own death warrant. She could quit and flee back to America, but she had no money saved yet, still paying down the debts her ex-husband had left her with. The apartment lease was paid by the company. Michael's school tuition was paid by the company. Everything in their life here depended on her employment at Kong Enterprises. She was trapped, and Kong knew it. That's why he'd let her see what he did. He was showing her the truth, testing whether she would run or stay, whether she could be trusted with the reality of who he was. The next morning, Jasmine walked into the office with her head high, sat at her desk, and worked as if nothing had happened. When Kong emerged from his private elevator at 10, she handed him his messages and his revised schedule without her hands shaking. He took them, studied her face for a long moment, and then nodded once before walking into his office. She'd passed his test, and in doing so, she'd become complicit. The months that followed were strange. Kong began to treat her differently, not with warmth exactly, but with a kind of respect she hadn't seen him show anyone else. He included her in meetings that she suspected other secretaries would never attend. He asked her opinion on matters that had nothing to do with scheduling or correspondence. Once, when a business associate made a dismissive comment about her being American, Kong had shut him down with such cold fury that the man had literally backed away. "Mrs. Thompson is more intelligent than half the men in this building," Kong had said in Korean, not realizing Jasmine understood him now. "Disrespect her again, and you'll learn that I don't tolerate fools." She should have been afraid of him. She was afraid of him, but she was also beginning to understand him in a way that disturbed her. Kang Min-jun was a criminal, yes, probably a murderer, definitely involved in enterprises that existed in the shadows of legitimate business. But he was also bound by his own rigid code of honor, by rules and hierarchies that governed his world as strictly as laws governed hers. He valued loyalty above all else, punished betrayal with no mercy, and protected those who belonged to him with an intensity that bordered on obsession. And somehow, despite never intending it, Jasmine had become someone who belonged to him. It was late October when everything shifted again. Jasmine was filing documents after hours when she received a call on her personal cell phone from Michael's school. Her son had been in an accident on the playground. Nothing serious, but he'd hit his head, and they wanted her to pick him up immediately to monitor him for concussion symptoms. She grabbed her coat and was halfway to the elevator when she forgot her purse on her desk. Racing back, she burst through the door without knocking, something she never did, and found Kong standing at her desk holding her wallet. He'd opened it, and he was looking at a photograph she kept there of her and Michael at a park, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. "I'm sorry, sir, I need to go. My son was hurt at school." Kong looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, his expression wasn't cold. It was something else, something complicated that passed too quickly for her to identify. "How badly?" "They said he hit his head. I need to take him home and watch him." "I'll drive you." "Sir, that's not necessary." "I'll drive you," he repeated, already moving toward the elevator. "My car is faster." She didn't argue. 20 minutes later, they were pulling up in front of Michael's school in Kong's black Mercedes, one of his bodyguards at the wheel. The nurse brought Michael out, and he had a small bandage on his forehead, but was smiling when he saw his mother. "Mom, I'm fine. I just bumped my head. They're making a big deal out of nothing." Then he saw Kong standing behind her, and his eyes went wide. Like most kids at the international school, Jasmine was fascinated by her mother's mysterious boss, the wealthy CEO he'd never met but heard about constantly. "Michael, this is Mr. Kong. He was kind enough to drive me here." "Wow, you have a really cool car." Something extraordinary happened then. Kong smiled. It was small, barely a curve of his lips, but it was genuine. "Thank you. Would you like to see the inside?" Michael looked at his mother for permission, and Jasmine found herself nodding. They walked to the car together, Kong showing her son the various features of the luxury vehicle, while the bodyguard stood at a polite distance. Michael was enchanted, asking questions in his mix of English and broken Korean, and Kong answered each one patiently. When they dropped Jasmine and Michael off at their apartment building, Michael was still chattering excitedly about the car. Kang had remained in the vehicle, but before driving away, he'd rolled down his window and told Jasmine to take the next day off to stay home with her son. "But the Busan meeting?" "I'll manage. Stay with your child." That night, after she'd put Michael to bed and confirmed he really was fine, Jasmine had sat alone in her small kitchen and let herself cry for the first time in months. She cried for the situation she'd gotten herself into, for the moral compromises she'd made, for the fear she lived with every day. But she also cried because, for just a moment that afternoon, she'd seen something human in Kang Min-jun's eyes when he looked at her son, something that reminded her that monsters were sometimes still men. The weeks that followed were different. Kang didn't suddenly become warm or friendly, but there was a shift in how he interacted with her. He asked about Michael sometimes, remembering details she'd mentioned about her son's school or hobbies. Once, when she mentioned that Michael was sad about missing Halloween because it wasn't really celebrated in Korea, a box appeared on her desk the next day containing an elaborate superhero costume in her son's exact size. "For the international school party," the note said in that precise handwriting. "Children should not miss holidays." She should have returned it. She knew accepting gifts from him was crossing a line. But she couldn't bring herself to do it, not when Michael's face lit up with pure joy when he saw the costume. So she sent a brief thank you note to Kang's desk and tried not to think about what it meant that her son's happiness now depended on the generosity of a crime boss. Which brought her to Christmas Eve, to this cold December night, standing in the office after everyone else had gone home, finishing the last of the year-end financial reports that Kang needed for a meeting with his accountants. She was exhausted, worried about the fact that Michael was home alone for a few hours with just their elderly neighbor checking on him, and counting the minutes until she could leave. That's when Kang emerged from his office, dressed casually in black pants and a dark sweater instead of his usual suit. She'd never seen him in casual clothes before. It made him look younger, less intimidating, though no less dangerous. "You're still here," he said, echoing his words from months ago. "Almost done, sir. Just finishing the last report." He walked to her desk and looked at her computer screen, scanning the spreadsheet with the quick comprehension of someone who understood numbers instinctively. "This can wait until after the holiday. Go home to your son." "I'm just about finished." "Mrs. Thompson, go home." She saved her work and started gathering her things, pulling on her coat and scarf against the bitter cold outside. She was almost at the elevator when his voice stopped her. "Where is your son tonight?" She turned back, confused by the question. "At home, sir, with our neighbor checking on him." "On Christmas Eve? He's alone on Christmas Eve?" There was something in his tone that made her defensive. "I had work to finish, he understands." "How old is he now? 8? "Yes, sir." Kang was quiet for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said something that made her world tilt on its axis. "Come to my home for dinner tonight, both of you. My mother is visiting for the holiday, and she would enjoy meeting you and your son." Jasmine stared at him, certain she must have misheard. "Sir, I don't think—" "It's not a request, Mrs. Thompson. My driver will collect you and Michael at 7. Dress casually. My mother doesn't stand on ceremony." He walked back into his office before she could respond, leaving her standing by the elevator in complete shock. An invitation to his home, to meet his mother, on Christmas Eve. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to make an excuse, to keep the boundaries between her work life and personal life firmly in place. But she thought about Michael, alone in their apartment on Christmas Eve, and about the note Kang had written about children not missing holidays. And she thought about the fact that this wasn't really an invitation at all. When men like Kang made requests, they were really giving orders. At 7 o'clock exactly, a car pulled up in front of her building. Not Kang's usual Mercedes, but a different vehicle, more modest, with a different driver she didn't recognize. Michael was beside himself with excitement, dressed in his nicest clothes, chattering about what Mr. Kang's house might look like. The drive took them out of the city center, into the hills where Seoul's wealthiest residents lived behind gates and walls. They wound up a private road through security that waved them through, and finally stopped in front of a house that took Jasmine's breath away. It wasn't ostentatious or showy, but it was clearly expensive. A modern Korean-style home with clean lines and traditional elements, surrounded by gardens that probably looked spectacular in spring. A woman in her early 60s met them at the door, and Jasmine knew immediately this was Kang's mother. She had the same sharp features, the same piercing eyes. Where her son radiated cold danger, she radiated warm authority. She was dressed elegantly but simply in a traditional Korean hanbok, and she smiled when she saw them. "You must be Jasmine," she said in Korean, then switched to accented English. "And this is Michael. Welcome to our home. Please come in from the cold." The interior of the house was beautiful, decorated with understated taste that spoke of old money and cultural pride. Traditional Korean art hung on walls beside modern pieces. The furniture was minimal but clearly expensive. Everything was warm and welcoming in a way that seemed impossible given what Jasmine knew about the man who lived here. Kang appeared from hallway, also dressed casually, and his mother immediately began speaking to him in rapid Korean that Jasmine could only partially follow, something about being rude to make guests stand me entrance. He responded with obvious affection, a side of him Jasmine had never seen, and then he turned to Michael. "Hello, Michael. Thank you for coming tonight." "Thank you for inviting us, Mr. Kang," Michael said carefully, using the polite Korean phrases his mother had drilled him in the car ride. "Your home is very beautiful." Kang's mother looked delighted. "Such good manners! Come, I have made dinner. Are you hungry?" Dinner was served in a formal dining room with a table that could easily seat 12, though tonight it was set for just 4. Kang's mother had prepared an elaborate traditional Korean meal with what must have been hours of work. As they ate, she asked Michael questions about school and his interests, listened with genuine attention to his enthusiastic answers, and told stories about Kang's childhood that made his son visibly uncomfortable. "She likes to embarrass me," Kang said dryly when his mother finished a story about his disastrous first day of school. Someone must remind you that you were once just a boy, his mother replied in Korean, then turned to Jasmine. My son speaks highly of your work. He says you're the only secretary he's ever had who isn't afraid of him. Jasmine nearly choked on her tea. I'm not sure that's true. It's absolutely true, Kang's mother continued, switching back to English. Min-jun doesn't respect people who cower. He needs someone who will push back when he's being unreasonable. Mother. What? It's true. You can be very unreasonable. She patted Jasmine's hand. You're good for him. He's been different since you started working for him. More patient, less angry. The conversation continued through dessert, and Jasmine found herself relaxing despite the surreal nature of the situation. Kang's mother was warm and funny, telling stories and asking questions that felt like genuine interest rather than polite small talk. Michael was having the time of his life, clearly charmed by both Kangs in their different ways. After dinner, while Kang's mother took Michael to show her her garden under the outdoor lights, Kang led Jasmine to a sitting room with large windows overlooking the city lights below. He poured her a drink without asking, some kind of expensive whiskey that burned warmly down her throat. Your mother is wonderful, Jasmine said carefully. She likes you, and she adores your son. Why did you invite us here tonight, sir? He was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the lights below. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. Do you know what I saw when I opened your wallet that day? Jasmine's heart started pounding. My photos. I saw a woman who left everything she knew to build a better life for her child, who works late every night, who never complains, who maintains her dignity in circumstances that would break most people. He turned to her, and his eyes weren't cold anymore. They were something else entirely, something that terrified her in a completely different way. I saw someone who was alone on Christmas, and I couldn't accept that. Mr. Kang, Min-jun, when we're not in the office, you can call me Min-jun. The intimacy of using his first name felt like stepping over a cliff. I don't think that's appropriate. Nothing about tonight is appropriate, Mrs. Thompson, but here we are anyway. Before she could respond, Michael and Kang's mother returned, the boy's cheeks flushed from the cold and his eyes bright with excitement. They stayed another hour, talking and laughing, and when the driver finally took them home, Michael fell asleep in the car with his head on Jasmine's shoulder, exhausted from joy. Jasmine carried him up to their apartment and tucked him into bed, this child who was her entire world, her reason for every choice she'd made. As she stood in his doorway watching him sleep, she thought about the evening they'd just had, about Kang's mother's warmth and Kang's own unexpected vulnerability, about the life they'd glimpsed behind the walls of that beautiful house. And she thought about what it meant that she hadn't been afraid tonight, that at some point over these months, Kang Min-jun had stopped being just the dangerous criminal she worked for and had become something else, something more complicated. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Kang. Thank you for coming tonight. My mother was happy. So was I. Jasmine stared at those words for a long time, her thumb hovering over the keyboard, a dozen responses forming and dissolving in her mind. Finally, she typed back simply, Thank you for having us. It was a lovely evening. His response came almost immediately. Sleep well, Jasmine. He'd used her first name. In all these months, he'd never used her first name. She set her phone down and walked to her bedroom window, looking out at the Seoul skyline glittering in the winter night. Somewhere out there, in his house in the hills, Kang Min-jun was probably standing at his own window, looking at the same lights. And Jasmine knew, with a certainty that made her chest tight, that everything was about to change. The morning after Christmas, Jasmine woke up to find her phone filled with messages. 3 were from her mother in Atlanta, asking about their holiday and reminding her that family mattered more than any job. 1 was from her ex-husband, drunk texting apologies that meant nothing after 2 years of silence. And 1 was from King, sent at 6 in the morning. Take the day off. Spend it with Michael. This is non-optional. She showed Michael the message over breakfast, and his face lit up. They spent the day doing tourist things they rarely had time for, visiting Gyeongbokgung Palace and eating street food in Myeongdong. Michael took 100 photos on the cheap camera she'd bought him for Christmas, chattering excitedly about showing them to his friends at school. He mentioned Mr. Kang at least a dozen times, asking questions Jasmine didn't know how to answer. Why didn't Mr. Kang have a wife? Did he have any kids? Could they visit his house again? That last question made Jasmine's stomach twist. She spent half the night replaying every moment of that dinner, analyzing every word Kang had said, trying to understand what was happening between them. Because something was definitely happening, something that terrified her more than witnessing whatever occurred in his office months ago. Fear of violence she could handle. Fear of these other feelings, these unwanted and impossible emotions, that was different entirely. When she returned to work 2 days later, the office felt different. Or maybe she was different. Kang emerged from his private elevator at his usual time, dressed in one of his perfect suits, his expression back to its typical cold mask. But when his eyes met hers across the office, something passed between them that made her breath catch. Recognition, acknowledgement, a shared secret about who they'd been in his home versus who they had to be here. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," he said formally, taking the messages she handed him. "Good morning, sir." He paused, glancing at the tapers in his hand. "My mother asked me to thank you again for coming. She said it was the best Christmas she's had in years. Please tell her we enjoyed it very much." "You can tell her yourself. She's invited you and Michael to dinner again next week." Jasmine opened her mouth to politely decline, but Kang's expression stopped her. He wasn't asking. His mother had extended an invitation, and refusing would be an insult. In his world, that apparently mattered. "That's very kind of her," Jasmine managed. "Friday at 7. I'll have my driver collect you." He walked into his office before she could respond, leaving her staring after him and wondering how her life had become something she no longer recognized. She was a secretary from Atlanta who came to Seoul for a fresh start and a steady paycheck. She wasn't supposed to be having dinner with crime bosses and their families. She wasn't supposed to be feeling things for a man who'd probably killed people with his own hands. The week passed in a blur of work and worry. Jasmine tried to focus on the mundane tasks of scheduling and correspondence, but she caught herself watching Kang more than she should, noticing things she'd overlooked before, the way he rubbed his left shoulder when he was stressed, suggesting an old injury, the slight softening around his eyes when he spoke to his mother on the phone, the careful way he treated a young intern who'd made a mistake on a report, correcting him firmly, but without the brutal humiliation she'd seen him inflict on others. Park noticed her distraction and pulled her aside Wednesday afternoon. "Whatever you're thinking, stop thinking it," he said in a low voice. Her phone buzzed. Another message from him. "I meant what I said. All of it." She should delete it. She should probably delete his number entirely, request a transfer to a different department, put as much distance between them. "And what exactly do you think you're having?" There was a longer pause this time. Then, "A chance. That's all I'm asking for. A chance to see where this goes." Jasmine set her phone down without responding and walked to her bedroom window. The Seoul skyline glittered below. A million lights in the darkness, a million lives being lived in ways she would never know. Somewhere out there, Kang was in his study or at his window waiting for her answer, and she had no idea what that answer should be. Monday morning arrived with new complications. Jasmine was at her desk reviewing contracts when 3 men in expensive suits emerged from the executive elevator. She recognized the type immediately after months of working here. High-ranking members of Kang's organization, probably lieutenants or advisors. They swept past her desk without acknowledging her existence and went straight into Kang's office. She could hear raised voices through the heavy door, words in rapid Korean she couldn't fully follow, but whose tone was clear. Argument, disagreement, anger. The meeting lasted 2 hours, and when the men finally emerged, their faces were tight with barely controlled fury. One of them, a thin man with a scar across his cheek, paused at her desk. "You're the American secretary," he said in English, his accent thick. "Yes, sir." Be careful. Our boss is making dangerous choices. People around him get hurt when he loses focus." He walked away before she could respond, leaving her cold despite the office heating. Park appeared at her elbow moments later, pale and nervous as always. "You need to be more careful," he hissed. "Careful about what? I'm just doing my job." "People are talking about you and Mr. Kang, about the dinners at his house, about the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching." "That's ridiculous." "Is it? Because from where I'm standing, something is definitely happening. And when something happens with Mr. Kang, people pay attention. Dangerous people." Kang's door opened and he appeared, his expression darker than Jasmine had seen in weeks. "Mrs. Thompson, my office, please." She followed him inside, and he closed the door firmly behind them. For a moment, he just stood there, tension radiating from every line of his body. Then he crossed to his desk and poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter, downing it in one swallow. "There's a situation," he said finally. "A rival family thinks I'm weak. They think I've been distracted, making poor decisions. They're testing boundaries, pushing into territory that's been ours for 20 years. And what exactly does that have to do with me?" He turned to face her. "They know about you, about the dinners, about my attention on you and your son, and they think that makes you a vulnerability they can exploit." Jasmine's blood went cold. "Are we in danger?" "No. I've already tripled security on your building. There are 2 of my men in the lobby at all times and 2 more watching Michael's school. No one will get near either of you." "This is exactly what I was afraid of. Your world, your violence touching my son." "It won't touch him. I promise you that." Kang moved closer, his expression intense. "But you need to understand something. This isn't just about us anymore. By spending time with you, by making it known that you matter to me, I've put you in a position. And in my world, there's only one way to truly protect someone in that position." "What way?" "Make it absolutely clear that they belong to me, that harming them means declaring war on my entire family, that anyone who touches them dies, along with everyone they've ever cared about." The brutality of the statement should have repulsed her. Instead, some deep primal part of her responded to the fierce protectiveness in his voice. "How do you make that clear?" "There's a gathering this weekend, a meeting between several families to discuss territory and disputes. I need you to come with me." "Me? Why?" "Because I need you to introduce you as mine, as someone under my direct protection. Once that's done publicly in front of all the major families, you and Michael become untouchable. No one will risk my retaliation." Jasmine sank into one of the chairs facing his desk. "You're asking me to claim some kind of relationship with you in front of organized crime families?" "Yes." "What kind of relationship exactly?" Kang was quiet for a long moment. "Whatever kind you're willing to accept. A valued employee, a trusted advisor, something more. The specific label doesn't matter as much as the fact that I'm claiming you publicly." "And if I refuse?" "Then you'll remain a vulnerability, a potential target, and I'll have to assign permanent security to you and Michael for as long as I care about you, which I suspect will be a very long time." She looked up at him, this dangerous man who'd somehow become important to her against all logic and reason. "You really care about me?" It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "Yes, more than I should, more than is wise. But I've never been good at denying myself things I want. And I want you in my life, Jasmine, in whatever form you'll allow." She thought about her son, sleeping safely in their apartment under the watch of guards she'd never seen but knew were there. She thought about her mother's messages about family and her ex-husband's worthless apologies. She thought about the life she'd built in Seoul. Fragile and strange, and nothing like what she had imagined. And she thought about Kang, standing in his office looking at her like she was something precious and terrifying and essential. "This gathering," she said slowly. "What would I have to do?" "Stand beside me. Let people see you with me. Meet the other families, show them that you're intelligent, capable, and not someone to be dismissed or threatened." "I can do that." Something shifted in his expression, relief mixed with something deeper. "You'll come?" "Yes, but Minjun, we need to be clear about something. I'm doing this to protect Michael, to keep him safe. That doesn't mean I'm agreeing to whatever you think is developing between us." "I know." Unclear, still terrifying, still probably impossible, but it was also undeniably real. "Saturday at 8, Kane said. "I'll send a car for you. And Jasmine, you'll need a formal dress. Something that makes a statement." "What kind of statement?" "That you belong at my side, that you're not intimidated by anyone in that room, that despite being an outsider, a foreigner, someone who has no reason to be in this world, you have every right to be there, because I say you do." She stood, smoothing down her skirt with shaking hands. "No pressure, then." "You face down worse. You face me down every day. You don't scare me anymore." "I know. That's one of the things I love about you." The word hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning neither of them was ready to fully acknowledge. Jasmine walked to the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. "Minjun, what if this doesn't work? What if I can't be what you need me to be in that room?" He crossed to her, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You already are what I need you to be. You just don't know it yet." She left his office and returned to her desk, trying to focus on mundane tasks while her mind spun with everything that had just happened. Park gave her worried looks throughout the day, but said nothing. Other employees seemed to sense something had changed, keeping their distance, speaking in whispers. That evening, she picked up Michael from school under the watchful eyes of guards she could now recognize. Men in ordinary clothes, standing at strategic points, pretending to read newspapers or talk on phones, while their eyes constantly scanned for threats. Her son noticed nothing, still chattering about his day, oblivious to the dangers circling around them because of his mother's choices. 2 days later, a box arrived at her apartment. Inside was a dress unlike anything Jasmine had ever owned. Black silk, elegant but not revealing, with clean lines that would photograph well and make her look sophisticated and powerful. A note in Kang's handwriting read, "For Saturday, my mother helped choose it. She has good taste." Jasmine held the dress up to herself in the mirror, seeing how it would look on her body, how it would transform her from a secretary into something else entirely. Someone who could stand beside a crime boss at a gathering of dangerous families. Someone who could hold her head high in a world that had no place for her except the one he carved out with his protection. She thought about calling her mother, about trying to explain what was happening, but the words wouldn't form. How could she make anyone understand something she barely understood herself? That she was willingly walking into a life she should be running from, for reasons that made sense only in her heart. Saturday arrived too fast. Jasmine spent the morning with Michael, took him to a movie, bought him lunch, tried to memorize every moment of normalcy before everything changed. The guards followed at a distance, invisible to her son, but constant presences in her peripheral vision. She dressed carefully that evening after dropping Michael at a friend's house for a sleepover she'd arranged specifically so he wouldn't see her leave in the formal dress. The black silk fit perfectly, making her look elegant and dangerous in equal measure. She did her makeup with unusual care, put on the simple jewelry she owned, and stared at herself in the mirror. She looked like someone else, someone who could belong in Kang's world, someone brave and strong, and not at all afraid of what the night might bring. The image was almost convincing enough to believe. The car arrived exactly at 8, but this time Kang himself sat in the back seat. He was wearing a black suit that probably cost more than her monthly salary, his hair perfectly styled, his face set in that cold mask she recognized from business meetings. But when he saw her, the mask cracked for just a moment. "You look stunning," he said quietly. "Your mother has good taste." "She does, but the dress is just silk and thread. You're what makes it stunning." They drove in silence through Seoul's nighttime streets, heading toward a part of the city Jasmine had never visited. The buildings here were older, more traditional, the streets narrower. Finally, they pulled up in front of what looked like an upscale restaurant, its entrance guarded by men in suits who nodded respectfully to Kang. "Last chance to change your mind," Kang said, but he was already opening the car door. "No changing minds now." He came around to her side and offered his arm in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and possessive. Jasmine took him, feeling the solid warmth of him through the expensive fabric of his suit. Together, they walked through the entrance and into a private room where Jasmine's new life was waiting to begin. The private room was larger than Jasmine expected, decorated in traditional Korean style with low tables arranged in a square and cushions for seating. But despite the traditional setting, there was nothing ceremonial or peaceful about the atmosphere. The air practically vibrated with tension and barely concealed danger. Approximately 30 people occupied the space, and she could feel every single pair of eyes turn toward her the moment she entered with Kang in the leading position. The conversations didn't stop exactly, but they shifted, became more deliberate as people took in the sight of the notorious Kang Min-jun arriving with a black woman on his arm. Kang's hand covered hers where it rested on his arm, a small gesture of reassurance. He led her to a table in the position of honor, the spot that indicated his status in this gathering. As they settled onto the cushions, an older man across the room raised his glass in acknowledgement. Kang returned the gesture with a slight nod. "That's Chairman Lee," Kang murmured in English. "He runs the Eastern Territories, and the woman beside him is Lee Ji-woo. She controls their financial operations." Jasmine studied the woman he indicated, noticing the sharp intelligence in her eyes and the way others at her table deferred to her despite her father's presence. Ji-woo was watching Jasmine with unconcealed curiosity. More people were arriving, and Kang continued his quiet commentary, giving them names and territories and relationships that formed the complex web of Seoul's organized crime families. The Kim family, the Choi family, the Park family, each with their own history, their own power, their own reasons for being in this room tonight. "And that," Kang said, his voice hardening slightly, "is Yoon Tae-sung. He runs the Western Territories, and he's the one who's been testing boundaries, the one who made threats." Jasmine looked at the man who'd put her and Michael in danger. Yoon was younger than she expected, maybe mid-40s, handsome, in a cold way that reminded of Kang. He was watching them with an expression that managed to be both amused and hostile. "He doesn't look worried about those threats," Jasmine observed quietly. "He won't be worried until he understands exactly what you mean to me. That's why we're here." A woman in an elegant hanbok began serving food and drinks, moving between tables with practiced efficiency. The meal was clearly going to be elaborate, multiple courses designed to last hours. This wasn't just a meeting, it was theater, a stage where power was displayed and relationships were negotiated through subtle gestures and careful words. Chairman Lee stood, raising his glass. "Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight to discuss matters of mutual concern. But first, I believe Kang Min-jun has an introduction to make." All eyes turned to our table. Kang rose smoothly, helping Jasmine to her feet with a hand under her elbow. She could feel the heart pounding but kept her face calm, channeling every ounce of dignity and professionalism she'd developed over months of working for this man. "Thank you, Chairman Lee," Kang said, his voice carrying easily through the room. He continued in Korean, and Jasmine was grateful for the months she'd spent improving her language skills. She could understand most of what he said. "I'd like to introduce Jasmine Thompson. She's been my executive secretary for 18 months, but more importantly, she's become someone I value personally, someone under my direct protection." The words were carefully chosen, formal enough for the setting, but clear in their meaning. Jasmine felt the weight of every gaze in the room assessing her, judging her, trying to understand what her presence meant for the balance of power. Mrs. Thompson came to Korea to build a better life for her son. Kang continued, still in Korean. She's demonstrated intelligence, loyalty, and courage in circumstances that would break most people. She has my respect, and anyone who threatens her or her child will answer to me personally. The silence that followed was heavy. Then Chairman Lee raised his glass again. Welcome, Mrs. Thompson. Any friend of Kang Min-jun's is welcome here. Others raised their glasses in agreement, though not everyone. Jasmine noticed that Yoon Tae-sung's glass remained on the table, his expression carefully neutral. But he was watching her with new intensity, reassessing whatever calculations he'd made before tonight. They sat back down, and Jasmine became aware of Lee Ji-yu approaching their table. The woman moved with confident grace, settling onto a cushion beside them without waiting for invitation. Mrs. Thompson, she said in perfect English, I'm Ji-yu. I've been curious about you since rumors started circulating. You're braver than I expected. Brave or foolish? Jasmine asked, deciding that honesty might serve her better than false modesty. Ji-yu laughed. In this world, those are often the same thing. Tell me, how does an American secretary end up at a gathering like this? By making choices I never thought I'd make. The best choices are usually the ones we don't see coming. Ji-yu glanced at Kang. He's different since you started working for him. Less rigid, more human. I wasn't sure he was capable of that anymore. Everyone's capable of change, Jasmine said carefully. Not everyone. In our world, change often means weakness, but sometimes it means evolution. Ji-yu studied Jasmine for another moment, then smiled. I think we'll be friends, Mrs. Thompson, and in this room, having friends matters more than almost anything else. She returned to her table, leaving Jasmine slightly dizzy from the interaction. Kang leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. You're doing perfectly. Ji-yu doesn't give her approval lightly. If she's claimed you as a friend, others will follow her lead. The evening progressed through multiple courses, each more elaborate than the last. Between servings, people circulated between tables, conducting quiet conversations that Jasmine suspected were the real business of the night. Several people approached to introduce themselves, their curiosity about her barely concealed behind formal politeness. She answered their questions with the same professionalism she'd use in any business setting, discussing her work at Kang Enterprises, her son's adjustment to life in Korea, her appreciation for Korean culture. She was careful not to claim knowledge she didn't have or pretend to understand the dynamics of their world. Instead, she presented herself exactly as she was, an outsider who'd earned Kang's trust through competence and loyalty. It was nearly midnight when Yoon Tae-sung finally approached their table. He'd been circling all evening, talking to others, clearly building to this moment. Kang's posture shifted subtly as the man approached, not quite threatening, but definitely alert. Kang, Yoon said, nodding respectfully. Then he turned to Jasmine, switching to English. Mrs. Thompson, I apologize if my recent business decisions caused you any concern. Concern is a mild word for it, Jasmine replied evenly. Threatening someone's child tends to provoke stronger reactions. A flash of surprise crossed Yoon's face, as if he hadn't expected her to address it so directly. No direct threat was ever made, only observations about potential vulnerabilities. In your world, I understand those are the same thing. Yoon's eyes narrowed slightly, reassessing her. You're more perceptive than I anticipated. I'm curious, Mrs. Thompson, what does an American woman with a young son gain from association with someone like Kang Min-jun? Surely you understand the dangers. I understand them perfectly, but I also understand loyalty and protection and the difference between a man who keeps his word and one who makes threats against children to gain leverage. The insult was subtle but unmistakable. Several people at nearby tables had gone quiet, listening. Yoon's expression hardened. Careful, Mrs. Thompson. You're new to this world. You don't understand all the rules yet. I understand enough. I understand that threatening me was a mistake, that underestimating me was a worse one, and I understand that this conversation is over. She turned away from him deliberately, picking up her glass and taking a sip as if he ceased to exist. It was a calculated risk, a direct dismissal that could either humiliate him or provoke him to dangerous action. For a moment, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Then Yoon laughed, a sharp bark of sound. "She has teeth, Kang. I approve. Perhaps I was too quick to judge." He bowed slightly to Jasmine. "My apologies, Mrs. Thompson, and my assurance that you and your son have nothing to fear from my organization." He walked away, and Jasmine felt the tension drain from her body. Kang's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. "That was either very smart or very reckless," he murmured. "I haven't decided." "Neither have I." But around the room, she could see the shift in how people looked at her. She wasn't just Kang's secretary anymore. She wasn't just some foreign woman he'd brought to the gathering. She'd shown strength, stood her ground against a direct challenge, and come out the other side with Yoon's public apology. In this world where respect is currency, she'd just become considerably wealthier. The gathering continued past midnight, conversations flowing more freely now that the main business had been concluded. GU returned to her table with two other women, and they spent an hour asking Jasmine about America, about raising a child in Seoul, about her impressions of Korean culture. It felt almost normal, like any social gathering, except for the occasional glimpse of a shoulder holster or the careful way people position themselves to always have a view of exits. Finally, around 2 in the morning, Chairman Lee stood and thanked everyone for coming. The gathering began to break up, people departing in small groups. Kang helped Jasmine to her feet, and she realized how exhausted she was, the adrenaline that had sustained her all evening finally draining away. They said their goodbyes to Chairman Lee and GU, receiving warm wishes and invitations for future meetings. As they walked to the car, Jasmine felt the weight of what had just happened settling on her shoulders. She'd crossed a line tonight, stepped fully into Kang's world in a way that couldn't be undone. In the car, Kang pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders. "You are magnificent," he said quietly. "Everyone in that room respects you now, and more importantly, they fear what I'd do to anyone who hurt you." Is that what I want? For people to fear on my behalf? In my world, yes. Fear keeps you safe. Respect keeps you alive. You have both now. They drove through Seoul's empty streets, the city peaceful in the early morning hours. Jasmine leaned against Kang, allowing herself to accept the comfort of his presence. She should pull away, maintain distance, remember all the reasons this was dangerous. But she was tired of fighting what she felt. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you're protected. Michael is protected. No one in Seoul's underworld will touch either of you." "That's not what I meant." Kang was quiet for a moment. "I know what you meant, and I don't have a good answer. I want you in my life, Jasmine. Not just as my secretary, not just as someone I'm protecting, as someone who matters to me in ways I'm not sure I can fully explain. I have a son. Everything I do has to be about what's best for him. I know, and I would never ask you to choose between him and anything else, including me. But being with you means exposing him to your world, to danger and violence and things a child shouldn't have to know about. It also means giving him protection most children never have, security, resources, opportunities. Michael is brilliant, Jasmine. I've seen his school records. He could go to any university in the world, become anything he wants. I can make sure that happens. By buying his future? By removing obstacles from his path. Is that so different from what you've been doing by working for me? You took this job to give him a better life. I'm offering to help you do that." She didn't have an answer for that. The car pulled up in front of her building, and Kang walked her to the door despite the late hour. The guards in the lobby nodded respectfully as they passed. At her apartment door, Jasmine turned to face him. "Thank you for tonight, for protecting us, for introducing me to your world." "It's our world now," Kang said softly, "if you'll accept that." "I don't know if I can. I don't know if I should." "Then don't decide tonight. Sleep, spend tomorrow with your son. Think about what you want, not what you think you should want. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, and kissed her forehead gently. It was chaste, almost innocent, but the tenderness of it brought tears to Jasmine's eyes. Then he stepped back, bowed slightly in the Korean way, and returned to his car. Jasmine let herself into her apartment and stood in the dark for a long moment, still wearing the black silk dress, still feeling the warmth of his lips on her forehead. Everything in her life had led to this moment, and she had no idea what came next. The next morning, she picked up Michael from his friend's house and spent the day at a park, watching him play with other children. So innocent and carefree. Her phone buzzed several times with messages from Kang, just checking that they were safe, asking about her day, sending photos his mother had taken at the gathering before Jasmine arrived. That evening, after Michael was in bed, she sat at her small kitchen table and made 2 lists. One of all the reasons she should walk away from whatever was developing with Kang, the other of all the reasons she should stay. The first list was longer, filled with rational arguments about safety and morality and the kind of life she wanted for her son. But the second list, though shorter, felt heavier. Protection, security, connection. Someone who saw her not as a struggling single mother or a foreign secretary, but as a person worth fighting for. Someone who made her feel things she'd thought she'd given up on after her marriage failed. Her phone rang. Kang's name appeared on the screen. She answered without letting herself overthink it. "Hello? I can't sleep. I keep replaying tonight, wondering if I pushed too hard, asked too much." "You did ask a lot." "I know, and I'm prepared for you to say no, to walk away. I'll still protect you and Michael. That doesn't change regardless of your answer." "What exactly is the question, Minjun? What are you actually asking me?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I'm asking if you can see a future where we're together, not just professionally, not just as friends, as partners, as people building a life together." "That's impossible." "I've spent my whole life doing impossible things." "Your world is violent, dangerous, not a place for a child." "My world is also loyal, protective, and rich with traditions that value family above everything." Michael would grow up surrounded by people who die to keep him safe. He'd learn strength and honor and what it means to be part of something bigger than himself. Or he'd learn violence and crime and moral compromises. He'd learn what you teach him, Jasmine. You'd still be his mother. You'd still guide his values. I'm not asking to replace you or change how you raise him. I'm just asking to be part of that life. Jasmine looked at the 2 lists on her table, at the rational arguments and the emotional truth. "I need time." "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." They talked for another hour about nothing important, about his mother's reaction to the gathering, about Michael's progress in Korean, about a new restaurant that had opened downtown. Normal conversation between 2 people learning to be honest with each other. When they finally hung up, Jasmine ripped up both lists. She realized that no amount of rational analysis would make this decision for her. This was about trust, about taking a leap into an uncertain future with a man who was everything she shouldn't want, but somehow couldn't resist. Monday morning, she arrived at the office to find flowers on her desk, not roses or anything romantic, but a beautiful arrangement of traditional Korean flowers with a note, "Thank you for your courage, Minjun." The week passed in a strange new normal. Work continued as usual, but there was a shift in how people treated her. More respect, more deference. Even Park had stopped looking at her with worry and now watched her with something like awe. Kang's behavior in the office remained professional, but there were moments. A brush of hands when passing documents, eye contact that lasted a heartbeat too long, small gestures that spoke of the connection growing between them. Thursday evening, Kang asked her to stay late to work on a contract, but when the building emptied and they were alone, he didn't pull out any paperwork. Instead, he poured them both drinks and gestured to the small sitting area in his office. I've been patient, but I need to know if you've thought about what I asked. I've thought of nothing else. And I can't promise I'm making the right choice. I can't promise this won't be a disaster. But I've realized something this week. I'm tired of making every decision based on fear and caution. I'm tired of protecting myself from possibility. What's that mean? It means, yes, I want to see where this goes. I want to try building something with you, whatever that looks like. But Minjun, we do this slowly. We do this carefully. Michael comes first, always. The smile that transformed his face was worth every risk. He pulled her to his feet and into his arms, holding her like she was precious and breakable and essential. I'll spend every day proving you made the right choice. You'd better, because if you break my heart or hurt my son, I will find a way to make you regret it. I'd expect nothing less. He kissed her then, properly, and Jasmine felt the last of her reservations melt away. This was insane, impossible, everything she'd sworn she wouldn't do. But it was also real and right and exactly where she was supposed to be. 6 months later, Jasmine stood in Kang's garden watching Michael play with Kang's mother, the two of them laughing over some shared joke. The house had become their second home, with Michael spending weekends here, learning Korean traditions from his adopted grandmother, while Jasmine navigated her new role in Kang's life. They'd taken it slowly, as promised. Careful introductions, gradual changes, making sure Michael understood and accepted what was developing between his mother and her boss. To her surprise, her son had adapted easily, seeing in Kang a father figure he'd never really had. "What are you thinking?" Kang asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "That my life is nothing like I planned." "Is that good or bad?" "It's perfect. Terrifying and complicated and completely insane, but perfect." "I love you," he said quietly. "I should have said it weeks ago, but I was waiting for the right moment." Jasmine turned in his arms. "There's never a right moment for impossible things. You just have to say them and hope." "I love you," he repeated. "Everything about you. Your strength, your courage, the way you push back when I'm being unreasonable, the way you love your son, the way you've carved out a place in my world that I didn't know was empty until you filled it." "I love you too," she whispered. "God help me, I really do." Michael's laughter rang out across the garden, and they both turned to watch him, a child playing in the fading light, protected and loved and completely unaware of how extraordinary his life had become. Jasmine had come to Korea looking for a fresh start, a better life for her son, an escape from a past that had broken her. She'd found all that and more. She'd found a family in the most unexpected place, love in the arms of a dangerous man, and strength in herself she didn't know existed. Her mother still called from Atlanta, worrying about her daughter living so far away. Her ex-husband still sent occasional messages that went unanswered. The office downtown still buzzed with work and meetings and the legitimate face of Kang Enterprises. But here, in this garden, with this man and her son and his mother, Jasmine had found something that no amount of planning or caution or rational decision-making could have created. She'd found home. "Come on," Kang said, taking her hand. "Mother's making dinner. She's been cooking all afternoon because Michael mentioned he likes japchae." She spoils him. She spoils you both, and she loves it. They walked together toward the house, toward warmth and family, and a future Jasmine was still learning to accept. Behind them, the Seoul skyline glittered in the twilight, a city of millions where one American woman and one Korean crime boss had found each other against impossible odds. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges from Kang's world, judgment from outsiders, moments when Jasmine would question her choices. But tonight, walking hand in hand with the man she loved, while her son played in the garden, she couldn't bring herself to worry about tomorrow. Tonight was enough. This moment was enough. This impossible, beautiful, terrifying life they were building together was more than enough. And when Michael came running up, demanding that Min-jun come see something in the garden, and Kang released her hand to follow the boy with genuine affection in his eyes, Jasmine knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. Not the safe choice, not the expected choice, not the choice any guidebook for single mothers would recommend, but the choice that made her happy, that gave her son a family, that filled the empty spaces in her heart she thought would stay hollow forever. The Korean mafia boss had invited his black secretary home for Christmas, and what happened next had shocked everyone, most of all Jasmine herself. She'd found love in the last place anyone would look for it, and against all odds, against all logic, against every voice that told her to run, she'd chosen to stay. As they all went inside together, Michael between them, chattering excitedly, Kang's mother waiting at the door with a smile, Jasmine took one last look at the city below. Somewhere out there were people who'd judge her choices, who'd never understand how she could love a man like Kang Min-jun. But those people didn't know him like she did. They didn't see the tenderness beneath the cold exterior, the loyalty that drove every decision, the fierce protection he extended to those he loved. They didn't know that monsters could be men, and men could change, and love could bloom in the darkest places if given enough courage to grow. She closed the door behind them, shutting out the city and the judgment and the fear. Inside was warmth and laughter and family. Inside was home, and whatever tomorrow brought, whatever challenges they'd face, Jasmine knew they'd face them together. The impossible love story between the Korean mafia boss and his black secretary had only just begun. But as Michael's laughter echoed through the house and Kang's hand found hers again, Jasmine understood that the best stories, the truest stories, were always the ones no one saw coming. This was their story, messy and complicated and absolutely real, and Jasmine wouldn't change a single moment of it.